Humans have always pushed the limits of what is known to their kind. They discovered new lands, they discovered new planets when they decided to look farther away into the stars. And today a presentation of a game which allows us to make a further step ahead in order to colonize the whole solar system. Hello, this is Michel Sorbet and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. Today I'd like to invite you to a trip to the stars because I'd like to show you a game which will enable us to colonize the whole solar system. This will be the review of a game called The Final Frontier, released initially in 1997 by Microgame design group and then re-released in 2021. This is a game designed by Kerry Anderson, which is for 2 to 4 players aged 12 or higher, with a time of play somewhere around 2 to 3 hours, mainly depending on the number of players and on the scenario and on the playing mode chosen. The Final Frontier is a game set in the middle of the 21st century after our planet had been ravaged by another world war. Mankind, after this tragedy, decided to decisively turn into the direction of the stars and to explore and expand, colonize the whole solar system. So missions were launched towards Jupiter and its moons, towards Saturn, and even towards the farthest planets in our solar system. In the game, each player will take control of an Earth superpower which will try to colonize the solar system and to obtain economical superiority or to obtain a decisive military victory over its opponents. We have several paths of achieving victory. It all depends on the victory conditions agreed by the players before the game starts. But sometimes those victory conditions can even change during the game, because we can start with an economical objective, but then due to random events, the game can deteriorate and it can be decided that the ultimate objective is to achieve decisive military victory. The game, as I said earlier, was initially released in 1997. The version from 2021 had been reworked. We have a new rulebook with some clarifications concerning all the rule questions which appeared from its initial release. The game has also one solitaire scenario available, but this is an introductory scenario which teaches us how to use some of the counters and how to move units on the spaceboard. Today I'd like to show you how this game looks, then briefly explain what are its basic concepts, and at the end of the video I'd like to give you my final thoughts concerning this title, both sharing with you what I liked in the Final Frontier, but what I also think are the weaker points of this design. So let's jump into it and let's see how the game looks and how it works. This is a brief look at all the components which we will be using while playing the Final Frontier. The Final Frontier is primarily a game for 2 to 4 players, in which we will be trying to become the most wealthy and most powerful nation controlling the whole solar system. In this game, we will be building our own empire, we will be creating colonies, we will be colonizing different planets and their satellites, we will be building spaceships, we will be attacking enemies' installations, and we will be trying to create the most efficient economical machinery, at the same time also acquiring global dominance. I said that this game is primarily for 2 to 4 players, but there is also one solitaire suitable scenario in this game. This is an introductory scenario which I have already presented on Wojennik TV during a short playthrough. If you're interested in seeing it, I invite you to my other videos, although this is a video made in Polish. Now, the objective of the game in the Final Frontier is variable because we have several scenarios in the game, both large scale and small scale. We can play scenarios in which, for instance, a monster appears in the solar system or an asteroid comes into the solar system and is bound to Earth. We have scenarios in which we will be fighting extraterrestrial life forms. We can also play a shorter game in which we will be directly jumping into combats on some of the planets in the solar system. But the campaign game is the way that the Final Frontier should be really played, because this is the way which enables the players to use all the variety of the mechanisms which are part of this game. In the full campaign game, the game starts at a point where all the empires which are to colonize the solar system are in peace, and there is no war between them. So all the efforts are concentrated on exploring and colonizing the solar system. But then the game can very quickly degenerate and a conflict can occur in which all the players will try to build the most efficient military units and destroy or take control of enemy colonies and mines. So in the game we can have several objectives. Firstly, we can play a strictly economical game in which the main objective of the players will be to gather a certain amount of build points, or rather of gross national points or of gross national product, which in some way reflects their economical potential. The player who reaches a certain amount agreed before the game starts, for instance 200 or 300 points, is the winner. But we can also play a game in which it's the military dominance, in which the control of the entire solar system due to military presence determines the victor. And it's up to the players to decide how they want to play. No matter what the victory condition is, we will be using all the components which you can see right now. And we will be using three kinds of maps, three types of sheets. The first one, which is the biggest one, composed of two parts, is the solar map, which represents the whole solar system as we know it. On this map, we will be having all the planets which are part of the solar system alongside with their satellites, although only the planets will be placed onto this map because those planets will be moved through their orbits. Now we have the inner system planets, we have Venus, Mercury, we have Mars and Earth, as you can see, very close to the Sun, which is in the center of this small orbit. And then we have Jupiter. We have also the asteroid belt on which we can place the four biggest asteroids. We have Pallas, we have the dwarf planet Ceres, Vesta and Hygiea. We can also use the asteroid belt in order to create asteroid mines, which will boost our economical potential. But then we have Jupiter with his orbit, we have Saturn with his orbit, we have also, of course, Uranus, and very far away we have also Neptune and even Pluto in the left corner. Now Pluto will stay put on his square during the entire game because it is so far away that his movement in comparison to other planets will be so small that it can stay put on its own place. Now this map will be used in order to firstly track the place where all the planets are located at a given time, but secondly it will be also used for solar movement, for space movement. All of the players will have access to the same kinds of units which they will be able to build during their turns and then use against their opponents or to boost their own potential, their economical potential. We will be having in general two types of units. First, we will have space units, which have a black background, which have also a name, a depiction, and three stats. The first one is the beam attack power. Secondly, we have the missile attack power, and finally we have also the structural integrity or the defense value. This is the number of damage points that a unit can sustain before being destroyed. The two others will be used in combat. We have two different kinds of attacks possible, beam and missiles. In general, when it comes to beam attacks, we roll a die and we try to obtain a result equal or lower than the attack factor, and we inflict the number of damage equal to the dice roll, whereas the missile attack will enable us to roll the number of dice presented on a counter, and we score one hit for each 6 rolled. As you can see, the units are different, their stats vary, and also their price, the number of build points that we have to spend in order to build such a unit, is different. Secondly, we have the ground units or ground installations, and here we have firstly mines, which will be our primarily way of colonizing new planets, new satellites. They will grant us also precious build points, which then will be used to build over structures. After placing a mine, we can upgrade such a mine to a colony, which firstly becomes a colony of a 2nd level, but then can be upgraded to a 3rd level, 4th, or even 5th level colony. We can place also planetary defense systems, which will be used to defend our planets, our satellites against enemy aggression. We can also create forces, ground forces in the form of regular units and marines. Both will be used primarily to attack enemy planets and enemy satellites in order to take control of enemy colonies. So all the players will have the same types of units, and it's up to them to decide what to build, where to send it, how to use it. The second sheet, the second map which we'll be using is the system display, on which, as you can see, we will be having all the planets and all the major moons which are present in our solar system. Starting from Mercury, then Venus, Earth, we go up to Pluto. Each of the planets, each of the biggest moons has its own box on which we will be placing units which are at a time present on such a planet or such a satellite. Each such a box can accommodate an unlimited number of units, and they can be units of different players, because each player can colonize the same planet or the same satellite, even if they are at war. They can peacefully share a place, but they can also fight an open war in order to become the only occupant of a given place. Each such a box has also a certain number which indicates its economical potential, which is printed on the upper right side of such a box. This number indicates the number of resources present on such a space, which increases your economical potential. In order to use this potential, you have to place a mine or a colony on such a space. The difference is that this potential is always multiplied by the level of your colony or of your mine. A mine has a 1, so having a mine in a place will grant you the exact number of build points, the number of gross national product which you have in this box. But as soon as you have a colony, you can multiply this number through the number indicated on the box. So for instance, having a colony 1 on Callisto will grant you 3 gross national product points, but if you change this mine into a level 2 colony, Callisto will start to grant you 6 gross national product points, which is a significant difference. Then we have also different kinds of places, because the majority of those places is hospitable, but we do have also some inhospitable places, for instance, the Moon or Mercury, which means that placing a mine or a colony on such a place will require us to spend more build points than on hospitable places. We have also the 4 giant gas planets, which are inaccessible. You cannot land on them, and obviously you cannot create mines or you cannot create colonies. But you can colonize their systems by placing those units onto their moons, because each of those giant planets has its own moons. Apart from this map, we will be also using a third map, and this is the battle display, on which we will be placing units when a battle will be resolved. Battles can be fought both on the space map as well as on a given planet or a given satellite. And when fighting such a battle, the aggressor will always start by placing his units into the extreme range box. The defender will in general place his units somewhere on the planetary surface when it comes to his ground units, but he can also defend the close approach or the orbit range against an enemy invasion. Those units will be placed onto this battle. There is some maneuvering onto this display. Firstly, it's the spaceships who will try to destroy their opponents, the opposing forces, launching missiles or shooting with their beam cannons. Then the invading forces will try to pass through this first line of defense in order to reach the planetary surface where a ground combat can take place. At the end, one of the sides becomes the victor. If the attacker emerged victorious, he can take control of the colony if the planet or the satellite had a colony of an opposing player. So those 3 different maps will be used to track different information, to move different pieces, and to resolve different effects. A turn of the final frontier is extremely simple because firstly we will verify the turn record track, where we have the information concerning what planet will be moved during a given turn. For instance, on turn 15 we will be moving the Earth, the asteroids, Jupiter, Saturn and Neptune, and each of those planets will move 1 hex on their orbit. Then we pass to the player's turn, and during a player's turn the first thing that we will do is to count the number of build points that he can spend. In the game we will be having 2 very important parameters. The first one will be the level of national interest that our nation currently has. This indicates the dedication of our own nation, our own imperium, to colonize the solar system and to create the biggest economical and military empire. And this level starts from a very low this parameter starts from a very low level, but then it can increase slowly but surely in accordance to what happens during the game. And in the game we will be having, for instance, an arms race in which the player who constructs the spaceship of who first constructs a spaceship of a given category can jump to the next level of his national interest. Each time a player increases the level of his biggest colony, also receives 1 national interest point, etc. This level will gradually increase, and crossing the level of your national interest with the number of gross national product that your empire produces gives you a number of build points that you can spend during a turn. Your gross national product constitutes of 100 points, which are your base points, which are supposed to come from the Earth, because you obviously are an Earth power who has an economical potential, allowing you to colonize the solar system. So you have already a big potential on Earth, but to this number you add also all the GNP produced by your empire. So for instance, having a mine or a colony on Europe will give you additional GNP points, which will be added to this pool. Finally, you will have a final GNP number crossed with the national interest. This will indicate the number of build points that you can spend. And those points can be spent in order to build new mines, in order to create or upgrade your colonies, in order to create planetary defense, raise regular troops, marine troops, or in order to construct different space vessels. Each time you spend or you acquire build points, you should keep track of it using a dedicated player record sheet on which you can first indicate the level of your national interest. As you can see, it can grow your GNP for a given turn, the number of build points that you receive, the total of build points, which are build points from the current turn, and those kept or unspent from the previous turns. Finally, you can track also the number of expended build points and the number of points that are remaining, which will be added to your potential for the next turn. So after spending those units, you can place those units primarily onto Earth because constructing on other planets or on other satellites is quite difficult, and you won't be able to construct the majority of the most expensive things otherwise than on Earth. Those things, those constructions or those spaceships will then be moved from Earth to their destination using the space map. If you constructed some ground units, they need also deep space transport, which also requires some build points in order to move them through the space map. Then you have the movement during which you can move your units through the space map, and if some battles are triggered, you can resolve them either on the space map or on the battle display if this is an attack involving ground troops. After doing all those things, it's up to the second, the third, or the fourth player to execute their own turns. They, in turn, calculate their GNP, cross-reference it to their national interest level, receive a certain number of build points, create new units, then move their units, and finally resolve their battles. We play in such a way until one of the players manages to score a victory, which, as I said earlier, means that he managed to create the most dominant economical empire, so he reached a certain amount of gross national product agreed before the game started, or he became the sole controller of the solar system by defeating all their opponents using military units. And those are primarily all the basic elements of the final frontier. We have several other rules governing, for instance, creating mines on asteroids, blockading planets, using advanced rules governing events. Those events are triggered when the national interest of a player changes, and we use a specific random events table, rolling the die, in order to see what event happens. And those events can be different. We can have bad events such as mining accidents, such as a solar flare or a rebellion. We can have space accidents. We can have depression. We can have also some positive effects. But in general, those will be effects which will be hindering our development or the development of all the players. The World War event is a specific one because as soon as it happens, economical victory becomes unavailable. You do have to invest into creating spaceships, invading enemy planets, and you can win only through the military, using military forces. But this is an exception to the global rules. So as I said earlier, we do have some over specific rules governing the play of the final frontier, but I'd like now to pass to the final part of this video and like to share with you my final thoughts concerning this game. I'd like to tell you and explain what I liked in this game and what I think are the weaker points of this design. So let's jump into this final part of the video. The Final Frontier is a game which already at first glance was something which very interested me. There are several reasons. The first one is that I really like games set in space, games which allow us to create our own empire, to develop our own economical potential, to build spaceships and to try to become the ruler of all the universe. Here, it's obviously not the entire universe, but the solar system itself, but still it's a space game in which we will be creating our own empire. Secondly, I like also games in which the victory conditions are depending on your strategy, because in this game you can both concentrate solely on developing a very efficient economical engine, as well as trying to create a very powerful military. Obviously, the best solution is to concentrate on both aspects in order also to be able to defend against enemy attacks. But in this game, you can win concentrating on economy, creating a very powerful economical engine, and maybe concentrating on the military aspect only in order to defend against enemies. So this game, as well as, for instance, Conquest of Paradise from GMT Games, is a game in which you are not forced to engage enemies in order to win a game. You can concentrate on the economical aspect, or you can also pursue the military strategy. You can avoid sending mines, colonies towards all the planets and satellites and concentrate on building spaceships, which will then be used in order to take control of colonies installed by other players. I like this approach. I like games which allow players to decide which path to take. Now, concentrating on the elements that I like in the Final Frontier, I'd like firstly to tell you a few words about the quality of the components that we receive, because always when reviewing a game, I am starting by this aspect, telling you what I think about the quality of the elements of the game reviewed. And here I'd like to underline two things. Firstly, the quality of the components that we receive in the Final Frontier is not of the same level as from games which are released by big companies, by GMT Games, Multiman Publishing or others. And for people who are looking for components of a very high quality, the Final Frontier won't be your choice. But secondly, the second thing which really deserves to be underlined is that the Final Frontier is a game which is a result of hard work and of loving this industry, loving this hobby by Kerry Anderson. Microgame Design Group is not a big company. It's a company in which Kerry is the designer, is the creator of the graphics. He even makes his games by his own. So judging the quality of the components of this game by the same standards but that I judge, for instance, games released by big companies wouldn't be fair. And this deserves to be said very clearly. We do have to say that the quality of those components is not extremely high, but we do have to understand why. Personally, I absolutely do not have any problem with this, because the components are quite functional, and this is what I always think is the absolute priority. They are not very pretty, but at the same time they are extremely functional, and this is a thing which deserves to be underlined. Now, apart from this, I'd like to say what I like about the Final Frontier, and then also what I think are the things which could have been done better. Now, judging the quality of the rulebook, because this is something which I can compare also in comparison with games released by big companies, I must say that the rulebook and the rules of the Final Frontier are very well prepared, are very well written. The rules are clear, the rules are extremely well laid. The way that they are explained is logical. It allows you also to find the information that you are searching for very easily. And this is also mainly due to the fact that the Final Frontier is a re-implementation or a second edition of the game initially released in 1997. Since then, a lot of questions were asked, a lot of questions were answered, and the new rulebook is also based on what was explained or on all the questions which were asked since its initial release. So when reading this rulebook, I really didn't have a lot of questions. I really didn't have a lot of doubts. The language used is very clear, is very understandable also for people for whom English is not their mother's tongue. This is a rule book which is very clear, and after reading this rule book, I absolutely had no doubts how to play the game. Even so, we do have some ambiguities. We have some rules which are not very easy to grasp, but still it's easy when reading the rulebook while playing to understand how some mechanisms works. This concerns, for instance, opposed and unopposed landings or combat resolution, which is not extremely simple, but at the same time it is well explained in the rulebook, so you shouldn't have any problems browsing through the rulebook and reading through the combat sequence to resolve your first combat. Then it will become very clear. Apart from that, what I really like in the game is the fact that you receive a lot of variance. You have some small scale scenarios, you have the campaign mode in which you can start the game from the moment when all the nations are only launching the first missions and trying to colonize the solar system, or you can start farther away when some colonies are already established and when all the empires have already a bigger potential in order to build their own empire. So we have also some introductory scenarios, and I like this fact that there is a great diversity. You can tailor the game to your own needs. If you want to play a shorter game, just pick a scenario in which you will jump already into an empire ready to create military forces or powerful colonies in the entire solar system. If you want to feel the full experience of colonizing the solar system, you can start from the beginning when you receive only a small amount of build points and you have to travel to distant planets, distant moons in order to create your first mines and colonies. I really enjoy it because thanks to it you really can choose the length of the game, the type of the game that you want to play. I like also the way how the mechanics concerning the economical layer of the game as well as the military layer of the game were prepared and were installed. What deserves to be said is that all the elements which are part of the Final Frontier work very, very well together. The theme of the game, the climate of colonizing the solar system, of the rivalry between the superpowers, is very well presented in the game. All the mechanics are linked together and they work very fine. We do not have any bizarre mechanisms which wouldn't be well linked to others. While playing this game, I have this feeling of colonizing the solar system. The components really work well. The fact that you receive the free displays, the space map, the battle display, or the solar display, and the depiction of the planets, of the moons, and the different spaceships make you instantly feel this space exploration, space rivalry theme, and I like it a lot. Returning to the topic concerning the economical and military engines, I like the way how the economical system was set, because linking the national interest, indicating the level of commitment of a nation towards space exploration, to your economical capacities and your economical potential is an extremely good idea. It shows clearly that devoting to the space adventure gives you more potential in terms of gaining build points. And this is also one of the reasons why I think this system works so fine. It gives you a reasoning why you are doing all this. It shows you clearly that developing new mines, new colonies, upgrades your potential and gives you an edge over your opponents. And this is what I like. The military element is also well prepared, is also well thought. I like the way how we can fight battles both on the space map as well as on the battle display, depending of course on the types of units fighting and engaged. I like the fact that you have several type of vessels that you can build, that you can use both beam attacks, missile attacks, that you have this battle display on which some maneuvering will take place, that you have both regular and marine units which will be landing on planets. You will be having epic battles fought both in space as well as on some moons or some planets. The system is not overly complicated, it's not extremely easy either, but it works very fine. We do not have a lot of exceptions, of dice roll modifiers, of rerolls. It is very simplistic in the way how the final battle is resolved, still requiring you to maneuver, to decide which units to engage, from what distance to engage, what weapon to use. So I'd say this is fairly manageable without requiring you to roll really a lot of dice using a lot of modifiers, but still quite engaging, and also allowing smaller or overwhelmed units and forces to be an active to become an active participant of the battle. We have many wargaming systems in which, when having an overwhelming superiority, grants you a lot of benefits and gives you almost instant victory. Here the fact that units will be shooting at one at another in alternating mode means that even having a lot fewer units engaged in a battle, you still will be able to do something, and I really like this idea. Finally, as I said also a few times already, I like the theme, I like the climate. It's a very climatic game in which exploration and colonization is at its best. So now time also to tell you what I disliked in the game, or what I think are the weaker points of this design. Firstly, I find that when developing your empire and when placing a lot of counters both on the space display as well as on the space map, sometimes both of them will become very crowded, especially when playing in a group of 3 or 4 people, because at some point you will be having a lot of counters placed on the asteroid belt where you will be mining asteroids. You will be having a lot of counters placed on the space display, on which you can have units on the same planet or on the same satellite as your opponents. So sometimes on those rather small spaces on the space display, you will be having units of 4 players or of 3 players. You will be having stacks of mines on the asteroid belt, and the fact that the background of the space counters of each player is the same, it is black, will mean that in order to see to whom such a mine, who is the owner of a specific counter, you will have to push the counters and look at the middle part of it, where the color of the number is different for each player. So the game tends to have some spaces where it becomes very crowded. The paradox is that at some point when war starts to rage, when a lot of combats are fought, the playing areas become less crowded, because units will be destroyed, units will disappear due to damage sustained during battles. So at some point it will become less crowded than before. It's quite climatic, but at the same time, until you arrive at such a point, you can have sometimes the feeling that the spaces are too crowded. Secondly, what I really disliked in the game is the random events table. Now, I really truly understand why this random events table was put into the game in the first place. Firstly, it increases the number of climatic events that can happen in the game, some mining accidents, solar flares. They are climatic, of course, but their impact, their influence on the game is really painful. And After my first game, I stopped using this table. I only made rolls in order to see if a world war erupts. If it didn't, I totally skipped the event that I received. Because if you sacrifice some build points in order to build a mine and to send it very far away, for instance, to Triton, or to even Pluto, and you wait 10 or 12 turns to get there in order to install your mine, and then one unlucky die roll makes you remove this mine, I don't think it's fun. I know it might be climatic. I know this represents some random events on which sometimes human beings do not have any impact on. But still, I find it frustrating. I think that this randomness is too much. Playing without it is much more fun, in my opinion. It gives also the players a lot more control over what happens, and I prefer it that way. The third thing, which might be problematic for some players, is the fact that in the Final Frontier you will be having a lot of bookkeeping. Because as well as in some other space titles, for instance, as in Space Empires, you will be tracking your gross national product, you will be tracking your national interest, you will be tracking the number of build points that you receive each turn, how much you spend, how much you can keep for your next turn. And all of this will be written on the special sheet on which you will be tracking all those elements. So at some point of the turn, after executing all those climatic maneuvers, after deciding what you want to do, you will be transferring to this sheet in order to write all that you invested in or all that you built. And this makes the game a game in which, firstly, you have this space theme, this space climate, but at the same time you will be sometimes changing from an explorer to an accountant who has to track points. This might be problematic for some players. I personally played really a lot of Space Empires and I loved the game. I do not mind taking notes, I do not mind tracking my expenses, because thanks to it, I can also invest in some elements. I have control over my expenditures and over my income. But I know that many players dislike this way of keeping track of some information. Finally, the last thing, which is not a thing which I disliked in the game, it's a thing which the game lacks, in my opinion, which could even make the game more interesting, It's the fact that the solar system, which we are trying to take control of, is only presented up to Pluto. But in reality, our solar system is a lot bigger. We have all the elements which are part of the Kuiper belt. We have all the elements, all the asteroids which are part of the Oort cloud. And Pluto is not the biggest of all those asteroids which is far away. We have Eris, we have smaller ones such as Sedna, such as Make, such as Quawar. I'd love to have all them in this game. I understand that the fact that the limits of the solar system are at the Pluto's orbit are also due to the scale of the game, because the elements, the orbits, the planets are presented in a scale. If we were to present farther objects, the board should be 5 or 10 times bigger. But still, we could have, for instance, created a separate part of the map which could be linked to the main map with a track through which we could have traveled through during several turns in order, for instance, to land on objects such as Eris or Sedna. I'd love such a thing to be part of the game. I think it would make it even more interesting. Still, it's not a thing which I disliked. It's a thing that in my opinion, could additionally add some depth to the game. Concluding, the Final Frontier is an interesting empire building game. It's a game with a lot of theme. It's a game where mechanisms are very well linked to the topic, to the theme of the game. It's a game which has an interesting economical engine, which has also an interesting military engine, where you can not only concentrate solely on building a very powerful military force, but you have to concentrate on the economical engine in order to win. A game in which you have several playing modes, in which you have also a lot of interesting mechanical tweaks which add a lot of depth to the game. At the same time, this is a game in which you will have to track some information on dedicated sheets, so you will be transferring from a role of explorer or empire builder to accountant. A game in which you will be having, in my opinion, a lot of fun if you are playing in a group of people who like space exploration, who like the space theme. This is a good game. I really enjoyed it, and when I will be looking for a space game in which we can win both through economical growth as well through military dominance, the Final Frontier will be one of my first choices. This was the review of The Final Frontier, released by Microgame Design Group. Thank you a lot for watching this video. I invite you also to take a look at my other videos and on what I published on Wojennik TV, Wojennik TV's profiles on Facebook and Instagram. I wish you a terrific day and see you next time.